talk to. Thank you, Dusty. Appreciate the introduction, and thanks to Dusty and Zenny for organizing this. Zenny and I met a couple years ago in Baltimore, I think it was, and we heard this lame presentation about Common Core standards and thought maybe it would be good, since I'm in the process of buying a mountain home in Colorado, that this would help. That was a joke. I didn't really told that. Those of you that are wondering what the heck, that is me. That is my high school graduation picture, and it's like I told the other group that after stepping down after 14 years of being the Commissioner of Education in Nebraska, I decided to go into the witness relocation program and growing a beard. I go by Jim now, so if you get a hold of me, that's what you need to do. This is a technology conference, also about college and career ready, and I'm sure you're more interested in the technology part of this than you are the college and career, although I don't think you can separate the two. But it does make me nervous that the orientation is to technology because, as I told the other group, I'm not a techie person. I do know something about curriculum instruction and assessment. That's my degree. In fact, I was president of KSCD for a number of years, and Harvey and I were running around doing things we shouldn't have been doing. And I'm not convinced you're listening. I'll check from time to time.
I didn't laugh because I don't want you to tell them what we're doing.
Anyway, we go way back to the Kansas Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development days, got back in the 80s and did some great things here in Kansas. And then the Common Core work, because Kansas is one of the states that I work directly with, and just started with them about 6 months ago. So whatever they're doing now, I'm not responsible for yet. Kind of thing, and they're having the same kinds of issues that most every other state is having. However, there's a couple of states that are really getting with it. North Carolina and Kentucky, and if you go on their websites, you can find lots of stuff on their Department of Education websites in both of those states, as well as Delaware. And Delaware is a real surprise to me because that state isn't as big as Thomas County in western Kansas. I think it's only like 29 schools or something to that effect, and you can drive from one end of the state the other 2 hours, as opposed to 3 days here in Kansas. I was superintendent in Colby for 7 years, and so I know how far it is from one side of the state to the other. Because the first time I came down to work with Stu Irve on the Curriculum Leadership Institute, it took me 3 days to get here, worked a couple of days, and then it took me a couple of days to, that was a joke as well. But anyway, it was just forever. The first time I came down, I thought I was falling off the end of the earth. I'd never been quite that far away from the capital, although I'd always been in the western part of Nebraska. It just didn't interest me to be in the capital, and I found it to be a very good thing to be clear out in Colby in terms of working with the State Department of Education, because you could tell them anything, and they never had any way of verifying what we were really doing. This PowerPoint, so that you don't try to copy this stuff down, you've got it here, and so Dusty or Zeddy can give it to you, or you'll see my email address up there, and if you want me to send it to you, you're welcome to it. Well, before I start, I'm likely to get real passionate about this whole thing, and that comes pretty natural. I did spend a year in a seminary preparing to be a minister, and so even at this time in the afternoon, you give me a captive audience, I can preach the word with the best of them, and we're probably going to have, relative to standards, a experience here this afternoon, okay? You have to have standards. There isn't a question of standards. You have to have them. But I'll Lutheran seminary, so if you're going to sit there motionless and stare at me, it isn't going to bother me at all. And I see quite a few Lutherans up here in the back, and if you want to convert yourself into more human-like denominations, you're welcome. Okay, why are we even talking about new standards, kind of thing? Here's what we're going to do. Oh, and thanks for this. I appreciate you had extra time. Here's what we're going to do. Common Core and technology, what and why, hopes and possibilities, where does technology fit? limits and liabilities. So why are we talking about new standards? You had standards before. Nebraska had standards before. Why are we talking about new ones, Common Core ones? What's in fact wrong with the old ones? Well, here's the deal. I want you to meet this. Yeah,
I'll get it.
Yeah, can you do that? I want you to meet this young man named Logan. Okay?
When you're a kid, you get asked this one particular question a lot. It really gets kind of fun. What do you want to be when you grow up? Now, adults are hoping for answers like, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a neurosurgeon. You adults and your imaginations. Kids, they're most likely to answer with quote, skateboarder, surfer, or Minecraft player. I asked my little brother and he said, seriously dude, I'm 10, I have no idea. Probably a pro skier. Let's go get some ice cream. See, us kids are willing to answer something we're stoked on, what we think is cool, what we have experience with. And that's typically the opposite of what adults want to hear. But if you ask a little kid, sometimes you'll get the best answer. Something so simple, so obvious, and really profound. When I grow up, I want to be happy. For me, when I grow up, I want to continue to be happy, like I am now. I'm stoked to be here at TEDx. I mean, I've been watching TED videos for as long as I can remember, but I never thought I'd make it on stage here so soon. I mean, I just became a teenager. Like most teenage boys, I spend most of my time wondering, how did my room get so messy all on its own? Did I take a shower today? And the most perplexing of all, how do I get girls to like me? Neuroscientists say that the teenage brain is pretty weird. Our prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped, but we actually have more neurons than adults. That's why we can be so creative, and impulsive, and moody, and get bummed out. But what bums me out is to know that a lot of kids today are just wishing to be happy, to be healthy, to be safe, not bullied, to be loved for who they are. So it seems to me when adults say, what do you want to be when you grow up? They just assume that you'll automatically be happy and healthy. But maybe that's not the case. Go to school, go to college, get a job, get married, boom. Then you'll be happy, right? We don't seem to make learning how to be happy and healthy a priority in our schools. It's separate from schools. And for some kids, it doesn't exist at all. But what if we didn't make it separate? What if we based education on the study and practice of being happy and healthy? Because that's what it is, a practice, and a simple practice at that. Education is important, but why is being happy and healthy not considered education? I just don't get it. So I've been studying the science of being happy and healthy. It really comes down to practicing these 8 things. Exercise, diet, nutrition, time in nature, contribution and service to others, relationships, recreation, relaxation and stress management, and religious or spiritual involvement. Yes, got that one. So these 8 things come from Dr. Roger Walsh. He calls them therapeutic lifestyle changes, or TLCs for short. He's a scientist that studies how to be happy and healthy. In researching this talk, I got a chance to ask him a few questions like, do you think that our schools today are making these 8 TLCs a priority? His response was no surprise. It was essentially no. But he did say that many people do try to get this kind of education outside of the traditional arena, through reading and practicing such as meditation or yoga. But what I thought was his best response was that much of education is oriented, for better or worse, towards making a living rather than making a life. In 2006, Sir Ken Robinson gave the most popular TED Talk of all time, Schools Kill Creativity. Shane McConkey is my hero. I loved him because he was the world's best skier. But then, one day, I realized what I really loved about Shane. He was a hacker. Not a computer hacker. He hacked skiing. His creativity and inventions made skiing what it is today, and why I love to ski. A lot of people think of hackers as geeky computer nerds who live in their parents' basement and spread computer viruses. But I don't see it that way. Hackers are innovators. Hackers are people who challenge and change the systems to make them work differently, to make them work better. It's just how they think. It's a mindset. I'm growing up in a world that needs more people with the hacker mindset. And not just for technology. Everything is up for being hacked. Even skiing. Even education. So whether it's Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, or Shane McConkey, having the hacker mindset can change the world. Healthy, happy, creativity, and the hacker mindset are all a large part of my education. I call it hack schooling. I don't use any one particular curriculum, and I'm not dedicated to any one particular approach. I hack my education. I take advantage of opportunities in my community and through a network of my friends and family. I take advantage of opportunities to experience what I'm learning, and I'm not afraid to look for shortcuts or hacks to get a better, faster result. It's like a remix or a mashup of learning. It's flexible, opportunistic, and it never loses sight of making happy, healthy creativity a priority. And here's the cool part, because it's a mindset, not a system. Hack schooling can be used by anyone, even traditional schools. So, what does my school look like? Well, it looks like Starbucks a lot of the time. But, like most kids, I study a lot of math, science, history, and writing. I didn't used to like to write because my teacher made me write about butterflies and rainbows, and I wanted to write about skiing. It was a relief when my good friend's mom started the Squaw Valley Kids Institute, where I got to write through my experiences and my interests, while connecting with great speakers from around the nation, and that sparked my love of writing. I realized that once you're motivated to learn something, you can get a lot done in a short amount of time, and on your own. Starbucks is pretty great for that. Hacking physics was fun. We learned all about Newton and Galileo, and we experienced some basic physics concepts like kinetic energy through experimenting and making mistakes. My favorite was the giant Newton's cradle that we made out of bowling balls. No, bocce balls. We experimented with a lot of other things like bowling balls and even giant jawbreakers. Project Discovery's ropes course is awesome and slightly stressful. When you're 60 feet off the ground, you have to learn how to handle your fears, communicate clearly, and most importantly, trust each other. Community organizations play a big part in my education. At High Fives Foundation's Basics program, being aware and safe in critical situations, we spent a day with the Squaw Valley Ski Patrol to learn more about mountain safety. Then the next day, we switched to science of snow, weather, and avalanches. But most importantly, we learned that making bad decisions puts you and your friends at risk. Young Chautauqua brings history to life. You study a famous character in history so you can stand on stage and perform as that character, answer any question about their lifetime. In this photo, you see Al Capone and Bob Marley getting grilled with questions at the historical Piper's Opera House in Virginia City, the same stage where Harry Houdini got his start. Time in nature is really important to me. It's calm, quiet, and I get to just log out of reality. I spend one day a week outside all day. At my Fox Walker classes, our goal is to be able to
seen that before. It's excellent, I think. It's, you know, one of the things that, point being, is that we're going to see more and more Logans as time goes on. In fact, I think it was just in the USA Today, the charter schools are once again on the rise significantly in a lot of states. And the reason why charter schools are so popular, vouchers are so popular with people, and homeschooling, quite frankly, is an alternative to what we're now doing in the public schools. Because I'll guarantee you the current content standards do nothing for Logan. If I were his parents, he'd be out of school as well, even if I was the superintendent of the school. Because simply, he's going to be more trouble in school than he's going to be worth. Everybody's going to hate him, the kids will hate him, the teachers will hate him, and so forth. And more kids are going to be like that. Now, not all kids are going to be like that, but all kids are going to need the kind of an education that wraps around them, not continually trying to sand off their rough edges to fit into the, you know, the round pegs into the square holes that we've said is our education. So, I don't think Common Core or college and career ready standards are going to meet Logan's needs, but they're going to get us closer than what we're doing right now. And here's my point. Some of you may want to do some looking on this. QEP has got a website called QEP Transformational School. And it talks about traditional school, transitional school, and transformational school. And the transformational school is exactly what Logan was talking about. And if the college and career ready standards get us to where we can move from transitional into transformational, then I think we have something to offer each and every kid because the education will be hack school for each kid. And that's what he was talking about. Why can't I make it my own? We talk about kids taking ownership of their learning. That's exactly what Logan was doing. Just because he does it in Starbucks as opposed to sitting in my sophomore biology class, which, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, would have made me quite angry because I thought every kid should have me. I didn't really, interesting thing is I later learned it wasn't about my biology that I taught. I thought the opportunity for me to have a connection with 130 sophomores every year was a very important part of what my life was all about. Well, that's what Logan talks about, but he's basically taken the ownership of creating it. Three other reasons, and we'll talk about why these are not necessarily great ideas that are driving the Common Core. International comparisons, global competitiveness, and college remediation. You can't hardly pick up the Education Commission of the States or USA Today, or that don't talk about the soaring rates of kids going on to college who need, in their freshman and sophomore years, tons of remediation, even to get into 100 level and 200 level courses. I find that incredibly hard to believe, but I don't know any different. I keep asking our higher ed institutions in Nebraska if that's the case, and they say no, but the number of kids that are going from the community college route into the four-year institution is just growing by leaps and bounds. And I don't know what it's doing here in Kansas, but they spend a couple years in community college and then go on. And I don't know whether it's because it's just cheaper. I doubt if that's the whole reason. I think it's because the coursework matches up better for many of them, because it isn't your valedictorian salutatorian that are doing it. It's your middle kid on down that's going to college that are basically doing that kind of thing. Okay, why common standards? In other words, the Common Core. Why do we need common standards? Well, the list on the left are basically the reasons that are driving the notion of having Common Core standards, so that they're consistent from one school to the next, from one state to the next. Doesn't mean they have to be the same, but just common enough so that mobile kids can move without, absolutely getting so far out of whack with the curriculum they essentially have to start all over. If you want to compare how one state's doing to another, which I don't think is a very good idea, but that kind of thing. Equity, without some kind of common standards, equity is just a wish. How do I know when I've achieved equity if every kid has to take the same curriculum? That's not equity. If it doesn't fit me, it isn't equitable. We used to think, at least I know when I first started as an administrator, that I'd respond to, well, we offer the same thing to every kid. He's got the chance to take it. the access to physics in the curriculum doesn't mean the opportunity to take physics in the curriculum doesn't mean I have access to it. If I hadn't had the math, if I hadn't had the science as prerequisite to understanding physics, I don't care how many times you offer it. Follow me? Okay. Opportunity, clarity, economies of scale. One of the things that we are finding in the states that are really getting with the Common Core stuff is more sharing going on across school districts in terms of trying to broaden coursework and things like that, which I think is a good thing. All right, what is a standard? Well, that's the traditional definition, and it's still the definition. It's what students are known to be able to do. What's different about the Common Core is know and be able to do so that they are college and career ready. Follow me? It's got its own standard of success built into now the definition of standard. Be able to know and be able to do in order to be college or career ready. As opposed to before, then we added on a standard for success called proficiency, which we found out really didn't need that. These are not intended to be national standards or federal at all. It says Common Core State Standards. Kansas did a good thing by calling them Kansas College and Career Ready so that it didn't have to deal with Common Core, which is being assailed all over the country. Every state's having problems with the more fundamentalist conservative groups. I call them the cave people. Citizens against virtually everything. There's supposed to be fewer, clearer, higher. One of the biggest problems with the current standards is there's way too many of them. We've tried to take everything that kids should know and be able to do and translate that into a standard, and the Common Core says, wait a minute, let's look at clusters of those things and write a standard that embraces anywhere from 10 to 20 standards, but let's cut them down. Let's make them less of them. Let's make them sure that they're clear and coherent, and then let's take them up the level of quality a notch, because college and career ready demands more than just content awareness that you can prove on a test. Here's an example of an old standard, content standard. We'll read a selection and be able to answer questions about it. In fact, you can find this on the Kansas third grade test at this point in time. Not that exact one, but one like it. Here's what a Common Core standard or college and career ready standard would look like. They'd be able to recount the story, define the central message, lesson, or the moral in it, explaining how it is developed in the text, and then if you wanted to even go further, have them be able to distinguish their own point of view from that of the author. In other words, they are text dependent because they need to use evidence from the text, not be able to pick out answers on a multiple choice test of which they have a 25% chance usually of getting it right just by guessing. Okay? English language arts standards, there's basically 4 strands: reading, writing, speaking, listening. And I have no idea how much you know about these things, so I'll try to go quickly, and if I go too quickly, call me back, please. There are huge shifts in the English language arts. And this is both annoying a lot of adults. In fact, there is a blog here in Kansas that talks about how much of the great literature that we're now eliminating because of the college and career standards. And Kansas does not specify what books you read at what level and what courses, but somehow they found out on a website in Washington, D.C. that some school was eliminating Petra and the Rye and I can't remember what, Macbeth and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, here's the shifts. Basically, more nonfiction than fiction, basically using whatever it is in terms of evidence from the text, and then complex text that has text that has academic vocabulary in it, where words like synthesize and correspond are a very common kind of thing. That's college and career ready. If you're going to prepare a kid to go on to college, they have to be able to deal with nonfiction. They have to be able to deal with evidence from a text. I was amazed that in the first semester of the doctoral program that I teach in, we have a course that's just kind of a survey course to get everybody started. Because remember, this group of 25 stays together for the entire 3 years of the program. So we have a course where we read basically 5 books, and one of them is 3 cups of tea. And 2 things happen. because they are traditional readers as well. They can't get over the fact that Mortensen probably lied about half the stuff in here, and as a result, they don't want to read the dang book. They miss the message. And then one of them said the greatest thing in the world. He said, you know, because I said, what are the leadership lessons in 3 cups of tea? He said, you know, the most amazing thing happened to me when you asked that question last time, that we had to come prepared to be able to answer that this time, is I started reading that book for how many mountains he had climbed, how altitude he had gotten to, how many were in their party, the typical things that most people read of content that they were going to have to burp out on a test, as opposed to what's the message. And the message is 3 cups of tea. The first cup of tea is you're an acquaintance. The second cup of tea is your friend. The third cup of tea is your family. And if he was going to build schools in Afghanistan for girls, he had to go through 3 cups of tea with the people in the village. Otherwise, he was still an outsider until he got to that point of having the 3rd cup of tea, which is a metaphor, by the way, in terms of being part of the family, so to speak. Well, this is saying, you know, it isn't the author necessarily that you're able to quote. It's what is being said. How is that applicable? You read Michael Fullen. What is he saying about current practice in leadership? It's not, can you cite all the different things that are in his book on equity and leadership and all that kind of stuff. That's not the point. The point is, what's the message? And that's what the Common Core Standards is trying to get to. Here's some examples when you look at old kind of standards versus the Common Core. Focus on literature versus focus on nonfiction. Complex text. Well, one of the things that I think is critical to understand about the Common Core Standards is this shift right here. If it was literacy or writing, it was the English teacher's job. In the Common Core Standards, writing and literacy is everybody's job. Science teachers, math teachers, social studies, and so forth. And you might even read a social studies book in an English classroom. Teacher talk also shifts, and I think this is interesting because these are the kind of things teachers would be talking about or saying or asking. How do you support that with textual evidence? Struggling with what Shakespeare's vocabulary is a good thing because that can be productive in terms of what have you learned, what do you know about it. Teaching for literacy. Can you support your claim with evidence? What if we change, there's a word you don't know. What if we change the word to something else? Would it change the meaning of that? This came out of the KAECT magazine, the last issue of the KAECT magazine, and there's a couple articles in there about the Common Core. You may want to take a look at it. The new math standards. The KAECT standards are by grade level. They look, in terms of structure, pretty much like the current standards do, except they're fewer, clearer, deeper, that kind of thing. High school ones are not by grade level, they're by concept strength. Numbers and quantity, algebra, you can see the list. This is probably the best thing. I don't like the KAECT standards by grade level because it tends to lock them in, as opposed to this doesn't say algebra has to be a course. It doesn't say geometry has to be a course. It could be Math 1, of which you do some algebra, some geometry, some numbers and quantity, which I would favor a whole lot. I think kids ought to take 4 years of math, but I don't think it ought to be bound by a topic. Because the idea is problem solving. The idea is how do you make it work for a kid like Logan? You know, when he's ready to do something other than geometry because it fits and he's excited about it, if you're stuck in a geometry course, what are you going to do with Logan? Here we go. Math shifts. Focus, coherence, and rigor. Again, I think that those are fairly self-explanatory. A logical connection across topics, and even in mathematics, there is a fluency. And I think the recognition of something we always thought was an English or writing concept of fluency has to do with virtually every subject, whether it be science or math, other than English language arts and writing. Here's some examples. What is our time frame, by the way?
Give another half hour.
No. We'll have you out here by 6. Okay, what does college and career ready mean? Well, there's a guy you ought to take a look at. His name's David Connolly, and he's written several books. And his whole point is you can't determine college and career ready by a test. That's his whole point. Because right now, most are saying, well, let's have every kid take the ACT. Or let's have them take the SAT. Let's have them do something else. Take the plan test as a sophomore and then take the ACT later on, or whatever it might happen to be. Take a test. That isn't going to cut it. That isn't what college and career ready means. Basically, when he says college and career ready means that you are successful in the initial credit-bearing courses without remediation. And I guess if you applied that to business, you would be successful in the lower levels or introductory kinds of skills without remediation. But to move up, you're going to need additional help and training kind of thing. Success is being in a progress successfully in a chosen program could mean a program of training in a career field, could mean college, could mean on the work site or job workplace. I think the key thing, and I'm not sure I totally get his career readiness piece of this thing, but we'll try to work our way through that. I think I'm getting a better and better grasp of it. But they're not the same thing. He's one of the first ones that says, wait a minute, we've got a whole bunch of people who do in the service industry who are merchants and clerks, and people who clean hotel rooms and are in the hospitality industry, and you can't say college and career ready are the same thing for those kinds of folks. Do I have to stomp on this thing? Ah,
There you go.
okay, push it 10 times.
Oh, we have animations as well.
What?
We have some animations in the back end.
I do? Don't you just hate people that understand this stuff? Thank you. Here's the model that Conley talks about, and I like it because he talks about there are cognitive and content-based things that need to be part of that definition so that you can think and so that you know stuff. Still, knowing content is important, but it's only in the context of being able to think. And then the key part about the transition into college or into career is being able to make that transition and go there and then act as if you're in charge of your own learning in order to succeed. And I do like that model. I'm going to skip that one and maybe. Okay, where does technology fit into this whole thing? In order to figure that out, and I can't tell you specifically a particular technology or anything that you can walk out of here and do right now, all I can give you is those mental models of how to go about this process. And one of them, and this is essential to the Common Core standards as it is to embedding technology into this thing, is you got to think systems. The only reason that I'm involved with the Common Core, because quite frankly, I don't like the Common Core by itself. I like the idea that states like Kentucky particularly and North Carolina have figured out there's a system to this thing and that those standards just don't stand out there by themselves. Okay, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about that as we go. So if you look at a systems model, it would say you go from standards to developing the curriculum, to designing instruction, to doing the professional development so the teachers can teach it. Then you deal with assessment and continuous improvement. And that is a system. Now, put technology in there, there's a couple of things. One, technology could be written into any of those arrows. How do you help make the transition from standards to curriculum, curriculum to instruction, and so forth? Technology could be part of that conversation all the way around there. Or, technology could be in the middle. That's a systems kind of model. If you don't do that, you have no hope of embedding technology because it'll sit on the outside. And as long as it sits on the outside, it'll be these techie folks who get all kinds of this stuff but can't explain it to anybody, but man, can they do technology stuff, that isn't going to get it embedded or integrated into the system. Okay? Think systems. Here's another way. Another systems thinking process is what I call matrix thinking. In other words, you put two things against, juxtapose two things against each other. So here I put technology and those X's mean If you wanted to put a particular technology in there, you could put those words in place of those X's. But you ought to be able to fill in this chart to say, all right, what do technology and standards mean? You ought to be able to write a statement. Are there standards you ought to write for what kind of technology kids should be able to use and employ and apply? Or how does the technology help them reach the standards that's there? Same way with curriculum. How does it help in the design? How does it help in the delivery? How does it help in terms of instruction? All the way across there. Because it has something to do with each one of those. But it has something different to do with each one of those. This one may be even helpful better. Because I liken it to a Rubik's Cube. You can't solve a Rubik's Cube unless you can think about multiple dimensions in terms of movement in one way causes something else to appear, and so forth. And I never figured those things out. But here's some examples. I just put these up there as technology like online technologies, the MOOC kind of stuff, anywhere, every time, all that kind of across. Math, ELA, English language learners, literacy, thinking, problem solving, that kind of thing. The idea is that you have to think like that, or technology will always be on the outside looking in. It'll always be an add-on. It'll always be a thing. And, you know, we've gone through that. We still have schools that teach kids keyboarding. And I'm guessing at this point in time, most first graders got keyboarding pretty well down pat, or maybe even most kindergartners. They figured it out themselves. And it doesn't have to be the old typing skill kind of keyboard use, it simply can use it. All right, some danger zones in this whole thing. I think you had a guy named Young Zhao come a year ago, or 2 years ago, and he didn't like the Common Core standards, and quite frankly, neither do I. But here's the issue. If you don't have standards, I don't know how you call yourself a profession, and if you aren't going to create your own standards, I will guarantee you someone else is going to do it for you. And they're going to force them down your throat. And so what caused No Child Left Behind to come about was the frustration of a growing number of people with the local K-12 education system that wouldn't respond to their logo or a kid like them. And we don't think that there was a lot of public support for No Child Left Behind. It was huge. The special education parents, the gifted parents, the NAACP people, every minority cultural group was there. It was huge. That's why it passed. Because they knew that voice, if it needed to come out, was bigger than all the other voices opposed to it. It was huge. I've got to say, I believe that No Child Left Behind, with the disaggregation of data, the equity standards was a good thing to do. The fact that it came from the outside in and from Washington, D.C. is what undermined it. But I will guarantee you, if you're a teacher and you don't have a set of standards for what you teach, then you're teaching by default. If your school doesn't have a set of standards, or your school district, or your state, somebody's going to give you a set, and you're likely not to like them. Because when you try to spread something that far over a state or over a nation, you rise to the level of average compliance. What you think people can stand. Not what can they do, what can they stand. Well, that's a poor way to run an educational system. Okay. Ideology seems to be trumping evidence-based policy, the global competitiveness thing. Everybody would have you believe the United States is losing its global competitive edge. It is not losing its global competitive edge. It is now sharing it with other nations to a level that it never shared it before. Well, why wouldn't it? We're into a global world. We're going to have to learn to cooperate and collaborate, not compete, because in competition there's winners and losers. We will always be the nation of innovation. Always. I don't see that ever stopping. We will not be the nation of miniaturization. We will not be the nation of creating multiple platforms who can interact with each other, because that's not our history. That's not what we do. But we are not losing our competitive edge. We're sharing it. As a result, we aren't the huge economic giant that we once were in terms of being able to generate billions and billions of dollars. There is a rating of countries called the Creativity and Innovation Index. The country that is #1 now has been the #1 country for 18 or 19 years since the time this was started, and that's been the United States. But you don't hear anything about that. Because it doesn't do, you can't energize the notion that we've got to have standards if everything is well and good. And people have to use some kind of a crisis in order to create the need to do this. And quite frankly, schools need to change. There's no doubt about it. We can't keep going with the same old model that my father went to school in when it was okay for most kids not to graduate from high school and get an 8th grade education and still be good citizens in their communities and that kind of thing. That's gone. It's been gone for a long, long time. The other interesting part is the international comparisons that are now being done of the 27 or so countries. I'm kind of flying over the top of 2 or 3 of these comparisons. We roughly rank 17th out of 27 countries that are in these comparisons. When those things started back in the early to middle 60s, where did we rank? Anybody know? Most of you weren't even around then. Same place. We were 17th then. I think it's amazing we're still 17th when we've got to the point that in many states, 85 to 90% of the kids are not graduating, which wasn't true back then. And if your state's like ours, and I know it is, the diversity in the state has, we have 15 school districts, including our largest, that are now majority minority and majority poverty. And yet we're still 17th. I think it's amazing. So anyway, we overplayed this thing. I don't pay much attention to it because I don't like it. When you're 71 years old, you can decide what you don't like and what you do like. That was a joke. Here's the real danger zone, and this is where I think Kansas has now dropped out of the Smarter Balance, which was one of the national tests that's coming down to basically align to the Common Core. And I think I don't know whether the state board or the legislature pulled them out of it. That may be a good thing, because I think those 2 testing consortiums are probably going to collapse under their own weight. But testing's the quicksand of this whole thing, and I think it's a time bomb and a sinkhole, because here's the deal. Let me introduce you to something. This is the Nebraska State Tree. And I put this up there last night, and I about rolled off the bed because I thought you'd laugh. That's a set of goalposts.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Come on.
Context.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll do that myself sometimes. Probably think this more like a set of high jump standards as opposed to goalposts, although that's not a bad metaphor, high jump standards. Okay, if we begin to put the standards up the sides, in other words, the lowest level is content standards, then application, then performance standards, we can write standards at any level that we want to. But what's going to determine what those standards say is where this bar ends up. You can have performance standards till they come out of your ears, but if that's where your assessment is, that's what your standards say. And I don't care what Smarter Balance does, they can talk all they want to, and I like these specifications they've developed. Certainly some of the things they're doing are much better than what we did before, but it's wherever the Smarter Balance assessment will become the definition of the standards by default. And that diminishes the standards, because I don't care what you do, the full intent of a standard can never be measured by a test. It can never be measured. The only person who's likely to know whether the kid fully meets a standard or not is the classroom teacher who has that kid an hour a day, 180 days a year, and sees them in all kinds of observed status. In fact, the research says the most accurate judgment about a kid's performance is the classroom teacher, not the test. Okay, an inconvenient truth in this whole thing is the Common Core, or College and Career Ready, is intended to raise the bar, to get it up there toward the top. But the level of assessment is going to determine what they mean. So here's what Common Core, or College and Career Ready, is trying to do, is to get it up. It isn't going to get it that far. Probably halfway between those two. Well, that's a good thing. It still isn't going to meet Logan, because Logan's way up there above this. He's not only at performance, he's at what's this stuff going to do to give me a productive life, to make me happy, to make me a contributing member of society, and that may or may not have anything to do with that assessment. And here's the problems with testing. If they're dependent on large-scale testing, standards are diminished to what the test can measure. You know, it's just like I came down here, and if I used the odometer on my truck, it was about 300 miles. I could have measured it with a yardstick. Might not have got here, but I could have measured it with a yardstick.
Yeah.
So if I think about how far it is down here, which one am I best advised to use? The yardstick's very, I mean, it's concrete. I mean, it's wood, but it's, you know, it's fixed kind of thing. I don't know whether that odometer on my truck, because it depends on the weather. In fact, when I started out, there was snow, and I slid for about 30 miles until I got out of it. I don't know how many it's that, you know, so forth. The point of it was either one of those, probably the odometer was better, but I didn't really need to know until I turned in my expenses how far it was. What really was the question? How long is it going to take me to get there? If I could have driven down the interstate, I'd have been here probably in 2 hours and 15 minutes. But if you have to go through Admire, Kansas, and Highway 99, holy mackerel, I about drove off the road there. Because this one turn said 50 miles an hour, and I thought, nah, it's kidding. It wasn't kidding. In fact, I don't think I got over 50 for probably 11 out of 13 miles. And I stopped and had my picture taken in front of the sign. Okay. I think third bullet here is really critical. Common Core standards are dependent on this notion called learning progressions. If you're not familiar with learning progressions, you better get familiar with it, because it is what it says it is it isn't this old, well, you got to learn basic skills before you learn thinking skills. It's saying that no matter what you try to learn in the way of a thinking skill, a piece of knowledge, there is a progression of learning that is a natural, definable progression. Margaret Heritage is a person you ought to Google sometime, or Learning Progressions, and she's from Stanford, and she's an incredible source of what kind of learning needs to go with the Common Core. Otherwise, the Common Core is just going to look like the old stuff with a new set of clothes. And I have some concern that that's what's in fact going to happen. Large-scale testing has limits. Anytime you use a large-scale assessment, multiple choice is going to be there. And a couple of things that it does is it limits the kinds of thinking to however many alternatives. It also makes it possible to guess it right, even if you don't know, and the person who's looking at the test results has no way of knowing whether it was a good guess or an informed answer. And so anytime you try to do large-scale assessment, these things are problems. Huge problem. They just tried to, Nebraska, after we fought off having a statewide test for so long, 2 years ago designed a state test and just administered the writing test this past week, and half of the kids in Lincoln got kicked off the system before they finished it. Another probably 10 or 20% of the kids got halfway through and their documents just disappeared. What? You heard that? Amazing. Well, you know, you start getting dependent upon technology and then things go wrong. And, you know, they asked me one time, should we do a pilot of this? I said, no, you should not do a pilot of this. You should do a full-scale, every kid, every school, formative implementation. Well, what does that mean? You don't count the results the first 2 years. You work out the bugs. You know, my grandson, he was livid over the thing. He said, you know, that was one of the better essays. He said, last year I had to write about some crap about my summer vacation. And this year I got to write about something I liked about it, was playing video games. He was mad. I guess his grandfather was going to fix that. Seduction. Here's what I worry more than anything else. If our current United States Secretary of Education and President have the chance, they will make it a condition of receiving any federal money, the adoption of the Common Core and the implementation of a standardized full-scale test. I just don't think the last time I was in Washington, D.C. to have any kind of conversation like this, No Child Left Behind and others, one of the congressmen said to me, after I'd given this long speech about how tests suck and all this kind of thing, and what we were doing as a response in Nebraska to it, he said, well, you sound like you don't want to be accountable. And I'm going to tell you, young man, so obviously you know this is quite a while ago, he said, if you're going to take federal money, you're going to be accountable for it. And by that point, I was livid. I said, sir, explain to me what federal money is. Well, it's the money we collected in taxes. From whom? I said, I'm very willing to be accountable to the taxpayers in Nebraska, but that is not your money. That is their money. So if you want me to be accountable for using my own money, fine, we'll report anything and everything to our own citizens, but not to you. Oh, geez, I could have done without saying that. The next day, we got to go over to the White House and visit with the president's policy advisor, who at that time was Margaret Spelling, who later became secretary. And there were 38 of us that got to go over there to have this private meeting with her. And 37 of them walked right through the metal detectors. And one of us got to go into a private room where the police force, in effect, there questioned them, patted them down, and guess who that was? It was. Compliance as a reform strategy, and I put that little icon there on the right. Most of compliance is a hammer and a nail kind of thing. And when a hammer is your strategy, everything starts to look like a nail. In other words, you got to force it in, and you got to be ready to do whatever needs to be done in order to have that happen. And what people like in Washington don't get is that whatever they do, they can talk about the purpose of it all they want to. When it gets out here, we're going to assign our own purposes to it. And most of the time, it's not what they thought it was. And I remember when I was commissioner, the further away from the state capital in Nebraska you were, the more independent your assertions about our intents of different things we were doing got, and the further off it got. They just don't get that piece. They came out to, we finally got them convinced to come out and look at what we were doing in our schools relative to classroom-based assessment kind of stuff. And they said, fine, we'll come, and we're going to land in Omaha, and we'd like to go to, they picked out some schools to make sure we didn't take them to all, high-class, suburban, wealthy schools. They said, we want to go to South Sioux City, and we want to go to Gering, and we want to go to Lincoln South High School, or Omaha South High School, and then get on that 3:30 flight out of Omaha. South Sioux City is 90 miles north of Omaha. Gering is 470 miles west. And then back to Omaha is another, they had no idea where they were going. And then it just freaked them out. When they finally did come out, we were able to see, some very diverse schools all over the Omaha area. Took them back, and on the way to the Omaha airport, you read a sign that says, "Welcome to Iowa." Because before they moved the Missouri River a mile, that was Iowa. And now it's in Nebraska, it's on our side of the river, but it's Iowa land. And the assistant secretary said, "Where are you taking us?" Not where I'd like. Okay, will standards standardize? Will Common Core standards? They could. Here's the danger. If you implement them in a formulaic way, design them, or implement them, they'll become a standardization. Every school's got to do the same thing at the same time and in the same way kind of thing. And what do I mean by formulaic? It means top-down. Wait to be told when and what to do. Be trained by a very small, clear, small and close set of individuals who do the training so that there's fidelity to this process, on and on and on. That will standardize. That's the worst thing that could happen. You are better off having your own standards, even if they're all different, than you are having that lockstep kind of thing. My best hopes for your standards as well as mine, that we'll have assessments that occur in the classroom where the learning takes place. And I will tell you that for 8 years, Nebraska demonstrated that classroom-based assessments are far superior to anything else that's on the market in terms of measuring learning, in terms of invigorating teachers, in terms of informing teachers about what practices are working, which ones are not, and you can get those to the level where you can trust the results. That multiple ways will be provided for kids to demonstrate what they learn, not just by a standardized test. I could see a set of accountability principles coming out of the Common Core where your accreditation rules would be something around these kind of things. Tell us, if you're a school district, what you're doing to align your goals to college and career ready. Tell us what you're doing to differentiate between your schools so that schools that are high poverty or kids that have kids that are gifted versus kids that whatever are getting the opportunities to learn. That you're focusing on student outcomes and that it's not just status, it's growth as well. In other words, how did they do last year? How did they do this year? I'm not going to go on through the rest of that. My hope that we'll produce data that answers these questions, because this is the critical question. This is what PLCs are supposed to do. This is what questions teachers should be ready to answer. This is what principals should be asking their teachers. Who's learning? What is it? Who's not learning? What is it they're not learning? What are we going to do about it? How do we make it better? This is my favorite. I want to see assessments that are not forensic. And what I mean by that is the kind of assessments that you can't determine rigor until enough kids have missed enough stuff that you decide it was rigorous, as opposed to being criterion-based in some way. That's the way we decide rigor on standardized tests. We got to wait till a certain percentage of predicted kids miss the questions and enough of them and say, okay, that's hard enough. What if you got them all to that level? I mean, the idea behind Common Core standards is, here's the finish line. We may not all get there at the same time, but eventually you will all get there. So 100% of the kids could get it, right? How are we going to do that if we have to have this archaeological kind of thing about trying to identify what kids don't know versus anthropological? And anthropology, I was happened to be listening to a NewsHour story on Jane Goodall, talking about her work with the apes, and forget the apes as the metaphor, but she didn't give those apes tests. She got out among them, and she observed them, and she developed criteria for observing their behavior to understand which behaviors were more animal, ape-like, or versus animal, man-like kind of thing. She had clear criteria for it. Well, kids are smart in multiple kind of ways. Why can't we find multiple ways for them to demonstrate what they do know, not be subjected to a standardized test that basically is based on what they don't know? Here's some resources. If you go to Achieve the Core, Achieve is the Governor's Association and CCSSO joint website on this. They're basically the ones championing the Common Core. The mathcommoncore.org is there, and you can see www.ccsso. There is a ton of stuff on those websites. And if you want to see some teachers in action, probably the best place to go would be Kentucky or North Carolina. There's some little video vignettes. So it'll show you what is a classroom that is based upon standards, particularly the Common Core. What does it begin to look like when teachers start to teach? That I think would be very helpful. Questions, comments? Yeah.
So, like states like Kentucky and North Carolina, how are they doing assessment? I know you're saying in the classroom, but
Yeah.
what are...
Well, I mean, they sucked before it started, and they suck worse now. They did their new assessments, and their test scores just took a dive, because these tests are harder. And they're fighting that, well, geez, our kids were actually really dumber than, and so forth, but that's that archaeological kind of notion. They're on their way up, starting to show some. The scores have stabilized and started to inch up. It's too early to tell that the trajectory really is substantially up, but I think they're doing the right thing. The issue they're having is the turnover at the local school level of both teachers and administrators running around 30%. They start all over every time a new person comes in, and especially if the school leadership turns over, that's just huge. So they went from, I think statewide, I'll just use North Carolina because it's one I can remember, from statewide upper 60s to 70% proficient to 30 to 35. And that was hard for some people to stomach. I took courage to do that. But they did all kinds of news stuff in advance saying the scores are going to go down, the bar is higher, you know, that kind of thing. Yes?
Well, earlier you mentioned about the charter school, the successful the charter school right now. I think it's last year, there's a program running by Fox documentary talking about the fixing school. And one charter school they went to interview is in Arizona State called Carpe Diem.
Yeah?
And basically it's no classroom at all,
Yep.
no grade divider. So it's all like in-risk students from everywhere public school in Arizona being sent into that place.
Right.
And it's based on the student competence level. So they coming in and do their work, and when they move on, they just go to next grade. For example, for math, they can just do whatever they have to do, and they learn the time management skill too. They created their own study schedule and being approved by the facilitator. Not really, it's a teacher, but in that situation, they are facilitating their learning. So I wonder if that is the future model of the school.
I don't think it is the model. I think it is one of the models. Right now, charter schools, as a whole, are no better than public schools. We have poor performing public schools or very poor performing charter schools. As a whole, they're not any better. The ones that do what you described, that take a specific clientele and do something totally different than what traditional school is like, tend to be successful. The others who don't really have a clear vision of learning like what you're describing in Carpe Diem are the ones that the longer they're open, the more they look like a traditional public school. And those don't do any better. In fact, if you happen to have disabilities or need any kind of instructional accommodation, they're horrible. They're just horrible. I think what's going to happen, as I said in the other group, we will see public education survive by virtue of the definition of what are those standards that kids have to achieve. Public schooling will be only one of the ways in which you can certify that you're college or career ready. A charter school might be one, a voucher might be another one, online might be another one. I think what you are going to see are lots of alternatives to the traditional attending a public school, which means that for many of you, your daughters will not be cheerleaders. That's supposed to be cheerleaders. You'd be surprised how often that gets into the conversation, though, from the adults, especially grandparents, who start, oh, you mean there won't be a valedictorian? Well, no, because they'll graduate whenever they are ready to go, you know. Well, how can we have football teams? So, good question, thank you. There are some charters that have really got it figured out. Logan goes to a charter school, by the way, when he needs to go. And it's the kind of a school that when he's ready to certify that he got this concept, he goes there, he does some kind of assessment that's more like a demonstration. They write him a piece of paper, you know, that kind of, he isn't out there on his own all the time. There are very few kids like that. But I could see our grandson doing one of those online things, and I mean, I'd hate to see that because of the social skills part of it, but he doesn't need an entire public school of 1,200 kids in an elementary school in order to learn social skills. You know. Other questions? Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.